so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm Danyu from the University of Oregon. Today I'm going to present my paper on anti-ESG pressure and investment. ESG gained significant attention in the past decade. There's an important debate about how ESG factor would influence the financial returns. However, there's another aspect of ESG, which is about a political matter. Right now, different politicians are taking various stands around ESG issues. For example, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis forbade ESG factor in pension fund investment, whereas California Governor Gavin Newsom requires firms to do ESG disclosure. In my paper, I address this following question. Does political pressure affect households' access to ESG? My paper focuses on people's retirement savings, specifically about 401k plans. I established a judicial channel through which politics matter, that is through the politically oriented federal judges. Let me explain about the structure of 401k plan. Employees have a 401k plan, which is sponsored by the firm. Different kinds of service providers and financial institutions would help with the operation of a 401k plan. Let's say there's an employee who works for Amazon. He has a 401k plan, which is sponsored by the firm Amazon. Service provider Vanguard would help with record-keeping service, investment design service, etc. Firms have to represent the best financial interests of the employees when they think about what kind of investment options to put on the menu. They are bounded by the fiduciary duty. If they fail to do so, then they are at risk of lawsuits. These kind of lawsuits are adjudicated by federal judges who tend to be politically oriented. As a result, we would expect that the firms located in areas with conservative judges who tend to be less friendly to ESG issues would offer less ESG compared to the firms located in the liberal circuits. In my paper, I show that there is an ESG offering gap between the liberal versus conservative circuits. Specifically, the firms located in conservative circuits are up to 6% less likely to offer ESG than liberal circuits. Of course, you might argue that there are lots of differences in investor characteristics and investor preferences for the employees who are located in the liberal versus conservative circuits. I show that this gap is robust even after controlling for the demographic characteristics, the firm characteristics, and even the local political leanings. To provide causal evidence of this judicial channel, I use a quasi-natural experiment. There's a reform that is directly relevant to the legal environment, which reduces the judge's discretionary power in terms of ESG issues. After this reform, I found that 40% of the ESG political gap is closed. So how does this judicial channel work? Why do we observe there's a convergence in ESG investment between liberal and conservative circuits? The answer is about heterogeneous preferences. I find that the effects are especially stronger for the green firms, the small firms, and the firms located in the liberal counties within the conservative circuits. Those employees actually do have ESG investment preferences in their retirement savings, but they fail to do so because of the federal judge. I also find that it's a national service provider, for example, Fidelity or Vanguard, which are more likely to provide this ESG investment in 401k compared to the local service providers. Since those people are interested in ESG investment, when we give them the access, they actually do want to put their money into this ESG fund in retirement saving. A natural question comes out. How are they going to influence their contributions to retirement saving? I find that this ESG access actually increased the total contributions to 401k. Specifically, the ratio of total contributions versus planned assets increased 0.9 percentage points. And this increase in ESG investment does not crowd out the non-ESG investment in 401k. Instead, it boosted the total retirement saving for the households. In my paper, I also discussed the fund performance and the expense of those ESG funds in 401k, which is an important topic that the fiduciaries and lawyers really care about. I find that this ESG funds has no sacrifice in financial returns compared to non-ESG funds. However, such funds are indeed expensive to invest, especially in the conservative circuits where the legal scrutiny of offering ESG funds is especially high. My paper is closely related to several strands of literature, including 401k money design, retirement saving behavior, and ESG investment. As far as I'm concerned, this is the first paper to study the anti-ESG pressure through the judicial channel. So here is the outline of my talk. First, I'm going to talk about the data and more institutional background and the legal framework, ERISA, irrelevant to 401k. Then, I'm going to show you this ESG political gap between liberal versus conservative circuits. After that, I will use a natural experiment to causally identify the influence of legal discretion on ESG investment. In the end, I will open the box and to see what kind of firms and employees was actually constrained by such legal pressure. First, to observe the retirement saving behavior and to know that what's their investment look like. To observe an investment menu, I get the 401k plan data from the Brasco database, which is basically from the Form 5500, sourced from DOL, IRS, FOIL, and other audited financial statements. In the Form 5500 Schedule H line 4I, they list all the manual options and their investment for each 401k plan. To identify if a fund is an ESG fund or not, I use the Morningstar Sustainable Fund classification. The reason I use this classification is most relevant to the retail investor experience and the litigation risk. This kind of classification majorly relies on the name of the fund and the prospectus of the fund. Think about if the investor employee, he logs on his 401k plan and he's thinking if I should do an ESG investment or not. We would not expect such a retail investor would dive into the portfolio level of the fund. Most likely, he will check the name of the fund and the prospectus of the fund. And that's why I use the Morningstar Sustainable Fund classification. This figure shows that the ESG investment in 401k grows rapidly in the last 10 years. However, right now, less than 10% of plans offer these ESG funds. So number is still pretty low. Conditional on offering this ESG fund, they usually just only offer one option. Some popular options include Fidelity Social Index, Vanguard Sustainable Index, etc. So why are there only 8% plans offer this ESG fund? Now I want to spend some time to talk about the lawsuit concerns over ESG. There's a key act that defined the fiduciary duty, which is called ERISA 1974. The full name is Employee Retirement Income Security Act 1974. Based on ERISA 1974 and its legal interpretation, the fiduciaries have to represent the best financial interests of the employees when they think about what kind of investment options to put on the menu. So even if they don't force their employees to put the money into ESG fund, just by offering this ESG option in 401k could make the fiduciaries get sued. It's a recent survey of plan sponsors, and 26% of people say that they feel the unclear regulatory factors really preclude them from ESG. They are unclear about how to consider this non-pecuniary ESG factor without the violation of fiduciary duty. When I talk to the industry people like Vanguard Fidelity, and they say we'll all go to jail, but his group recommends including ESG fund in 401k. And now the fiduciaries are faced with this ESG catch-22 situation. On the one hand, they want to think about all the possible factors that's relevant to return. However, if they think about ESG factor, they are at risk of lawsuits. Here.
Do we see the other way around if you were to say there's going to be like an oil fund, there's going to be a commodities fund, there's going to be like a Texas-focused fund in Texas, there's going to be an Oregon-focused fund in Oregon? Because I'm pretty sure you could do exactly the same case, right? But nobody's actually mounting those cases. And would that be potentially not exactly an instrument, but a placebo test you could have done instead?
Yeah, that's definitely right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can see there's a lot of like state variation and like, you know, like state policy have different kind of like regulations on like different kinds of funds and they have different preferences. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely true. Yeah. So here is a recent lawsuit, like a pilot sued American Airlines due to like offering this ESG option in their 401k. And they argue that the Fidelity Investment as well as the American Airlines sacrificed their fiduciary duty to pursue their leftist political agenda. And this lawsuit is still going on. It just got certified to class action lawsuit, and the Texan federal judge dismissed the motion for summary for the summary motion, and they want to continue to go to trial.
In the law and economics community, this is referred to as the litigation over the Fisher separation theorem.
Can you say again?
In the law and economics literature, this is referred to as litigation over the Fisher separation theorem.
Awesome.
That's a joke, but that's nobody's laughing. So
yeah, awesome. Great. Okay, so now I want to show you this ESG political gap between the liberal versus conservative circuits. So here, based on some political science research, different federal judges have different political leaning. And as you can see that the gray areas represent the federal judges that have more liberal leanings, whereas the red areas represent judges that have more conservative leanings. So here, essentially, I want to compare the ESG offering for the areas with conservative judges versus the areas with liberal judges. You can see that the firms in conservative circuits are around 6% less likely to offer ESG than liberal circuits. Of course, there are a lot of differences in investor preferences for the employees who are located in the liberal versus conservative circuits. For example, demographic characteristics. The employees can talk to their 401k investment committee to ask for those ESG funds. So the menu of the 401k is a reflection of the employee preferences as well as the financial advisor's preferences. So here I control the employee's income, their age, and local housing value. And another factor is the ESG score of the firm. So the green firm employees also tend to argue for adding this ESG option in their 401k. So green firm employees could be a proxy for their preference for ESG investment. In my paper, I also show that the green firm employees are more likely to put their investment on ESG in their retirement savings. So here...
Could I just, and this is a serious question, could you tell me a little bit more about how how the classification of liberal and conservative has come up? Because there's a lot of evidence in law and economics in classifying that it depends on the domain of the litigation. There are some domains over which they may be liberal and others might be conservative. Just like, and I'm not trying to be cute here, you know, MAGA Republicans are not the same as old Republicans, and I mean that seriously in the sense that, you know, so tell us about this classification.
100%, yeah. So basically, like this classification I'm using here is based on like some political science literature. So they study the ruling of those federal judges across all domains. And then they show like their ruling, and then they infer their political leanings from their ruling decisions.
I would not trust the political science literature in this. I mean, no. This calls for legal judgments. These decisions are dramatically different in different types of legal domains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just flagged that.
I agree with you, and I think like something I'm currently working on is that I want to pick like the lawsuits or the ruling decisions specifically relevant to the environment and social, exactly. And then, so that's gonna get a more clear picture of the specific issue. Yeah, awesome, yeah.
So that's exactly why I asked the question about like oil exposure and stuff like that. That seems like a way more relevant variable than this conservative liberal thing, which seems location. Like Texas heavily exposed to oil, Oregon isn't. if you're going to do this ESG thing, then for example, I wanted to see up there, what if you work for ExxonMobil? Do you offer a commodities plan? You know, that would
Right.
really hammer your point home.
Right. Yeah. Totally. That's definitely true. Like, so I try to like, make the firms, the employees, as comparable as possible. In conservative versus liberal circuits. So, that's why like I try to, take care of like the industry, also the demographic, and also like the ESG score of the firm, and also like some other firm characteristics. But I agree with you. There's a
Well, you have the
difference
history
here.
of decisions, right?
Right.
And you also have their LinkedIn profile as a judge. If they work for ExxonMobil, you know who they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
There are filings on that for judges, particularly in federal court, but you can track it.
They would be really useful.
This is a report. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
In the firm's offerings, are they actually called USG funds? And how,
ESG.
That's a great question. So here I use the Morningstar classification. So it's basically depends on the name of the fund and the prospectus of the fund. So if you check their name, it will just say I'm a ESG fund, or like sustainable fund, or like social fund. So when the employees look at the menu, they can quickly identify, oh, this is a ESG fund.
There is actually a literature, there's some very good papers in JFQA on whether these ones that claim they're ESG, actually that's just a pure marketing ploy. And in some cases, not all, in some cases, not surprisingly, it is just a pure marketing ploy.
Yeah, that's
Full
definitely true.
stop.
And also there's another thing is that, we know like the firms do like the firms and also the funds do greenwashing, but they also could do brownwashing to attract some like people like from like, not into this ESG things, more from conservative people and from like, people not into like environmental things. So, Okay, let's go back. And another thing is about the political leaning of the employees. So the conservative leaning employees tend to be less interested in ESG investment, which is not surprising. So here I can show the local political leave, which is measured by the vote ratio in 2016 presidential election, measured at the county level. Okay. And some other characteristics I take care is like firm characteristics, for example, the firm size and firm profitability. And those kind of characteristics could influence their capacity of offering this ESG fund in the 401k. So as you can see that after controlling for the demographic characteristics, the ESG score, the local political leaning, and firm characteristics, a substantial share of the gap is closed. However, there's still around 2.9% difference in ESG offering between the liberal versus conservative circuits.
So just on the previous slide, so maybe a question, why do you have 8,000 firms? There's like hundreds of thousands of VC plans that filed in Form 5500, and there's a lot in Brightscope, so I'm just curious how.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, like after I control all the characteristics, and then the sample just drops to around like 1,500 firms, something like that.
It's 1,500 firms a year?
Exactly.
And the characteristic being having all of these.
Having all of this, yeah. Exactly, yeah. And also, Brightscope covers like private firms and like public firms, and this paper is only about public firms. Yeah.
I think it'd be useful to document the selection, like how are different these 1,500 from the
Representative
universe
for
of.
the
Yeah.
exactly. That's good. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Awesome. Is there another question?
I'm just curious, I'm not familiar with the litigation involving these things, but I'm struggling trying to figure what damages they're claiming on a product that lasts decades.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, the pilot lawsuit that's going on right now is like they argue about this damage. Because it's like from the employee side, it's hard for them to argue to present a specific number of damage. And now they are kind of in the process of discussing what the damage actually was. And in terms of considering ESG factor, some possible channels, some possible ways, like for example, it's expensive to invest. So the expense, the fee is an important factor. And also like in terms of the return, and it's only like 10 years of ESG fund, it's very hard to make any conclusion about expected return in such a short time period. And like ESG factor is like a non-peculiar factor. So in terms of like the strict fiduciary duty law, even just considering this non-peculiar factor is the same, like you cannot even do that. So all those like different reasons like make the litigation risk of offering ESG fund in foreign case especially high.
Yeah, I think actually an interesting question there is, I would just quickly address in the paper the legal standing upon which these were brought. In criminal cases it's habeas corpus, but here you've got to have some reason for actually bringing an action. Forget the fact that the guy was a pilot unless he was forced to take company stock. Why should he, so what I would do there, and this would help the paper, is ask what's the alleged legal basis of standing to even bring the action before you get to damages. It's actually not really the damages, it's the standing. There's a legal matter that matters here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's exactly, if you check the court document, that's exactly what they argue.
Yeah.
So like they make this case certified to a class action lawsuit and say like even if without actual damage, it still has enough evidence to suggest the case to keep going to the trial.
Yeah, no, I do a lot of damages testifying in court, and I couldn't imagine being called if they haven't established standing.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Okay. So what I'm talking about here essentially is that the ESG investment opportunities vary with circuits. So imagine there are two firms. One firm is located in Washington County, Oregon, and the other one located in Dallas County in Texas. These two firms, they have the same demographics, they have same local politics, same investor preferences and firm characteristics. But just because they are located in different areas with different political leaning federal judges, they have different ESG investment opportunity. Next, I want to show you this causal evidence of legal discretion and ESG investment. In 2015, the Department of Labor first time clarified the legal environment for ESG and fiduciary duty. This is the first DOI Interpret Boulevard to directly mention ESG factor instead of the ETI, economically targeted investment. So this happens in October 2015, and Department of Labor Secretary Thomas Price said that I want to remove the cookies of impact investment in 401k. They attempt to remove the perceived stigma in this interpretive bulletin. After this legal guidance, a lot of retirement plan service providers and the industry lobbying group quickly voiced support for such guidance. So what did it say in this interpretive bulletin? They talk about how to comply with ERISA fiduciary standards and how to add ESG factor without a violation of fiduciary duty. So they provide two opportunities to consider ESG goals. The first one is about risk and return profile. It means that if the ESG factor could influence the risk and return of the investment, then you should take ESG into consideration. The next one is called collateral benefits, which means something go beyond risk and return. It means that if two investments are exactly the same, then the fiduciary should choose the ESG investment as a tiebreaker. And they also argue for no additional scrutiny on ESG investment compared to the non-ESG investment. After this legal guidance, it effectively reduces the judge's discretionary power in deciding if it's okay to offer ESG fund or not. It neutralized the role of circuit courts in deciding how to consider ESG fund. As a result, we would expect that the firms located in the conservative circuits who have a great pressure to incorporate ESG fund in 401k would have a larger increase in ESG investment compared to the liberal circuit. Here is my difference in difference framework. Essentially, I want to compare the liberal versus conservative circuits pre and post the shock. So there are two outcome variables I majorly look at. The first one is the ESG offering, which is dummy variable equals 1 if there are at least one ESG option in 401k plan. The other one is ESG holding. So I'm interested that if you offer this ESG fund in 401k, if people actually allocate their money to those ESG funds in 401k. So here the ESG holdings is a allocation percentage of ESG investment relevant to the total account balance. So the standard differentiative fixed effect control the years fixed effect. So here I show that the firms located in the conservative circuits actually increase more in ESG offering compared to the firms located in the liberal circuits. In terms of magnitude, the first column does not control the service provider ID fixed effect. Service provider just like Fidelity or Vanguard stay straight like that. And the second column, I control the service provider fixed effect. It means that if you look at the same service provider, let's say they all get service from Fidelity, and they're located in different regions. One is conservative circuits, one is liberal circuits. And I show that is around like 2.7 percentage points conditional on the same service provider. And that is around 40% of the ESG political gap that we were talking about before. In terms of ESG holdings, the firms in the conservative circuits also increase more in their ESG holdings compared to the firms located in the liberal circuits. Again, the first column talks about the effect without controlling the service provider fixed effect, and the second column takes into consideration about the role of service provider in this ESG investment. So if we control the same service provider, then it's around 340 per account per year. So here you can see that after this legal guidance, which happened in October 2015, there's a jump in the difference between ESG holdings between liberal and conservative circuits. And
but isn't that individual choices of how they want to allocate their retirement savings in their account? So it's not firm holding, it's not a decision of the firm.
So there are two things. So one part of it is the firm choice. So firm have like Fidelity or some financial advisors can give them advice on what kind of things to add to the menu.
Yes.
This is the first step. And the other step is the employees, which is more relevant to the holding. So if the fiduciaries, if the Fidelity offer those ESG funds in their 401k, but actually nobody is interested in it, they will not expect the ESG holdings change.
But on the previous
slide,
it's
the holdings.
the holdings.
Exactly.
Right? That's then the individuals choosing other people.
Exactly.
The offer, ESG offer.
Exactly, that's correct. And like, so basically the thing about this ESG holding is like the change in ESG holding is a component of two things. The first one is that some plans start to offer ESG. So it's from 0 to 1. So it's extensive money. So of course it's gonna increase. But another thing is that for the, okay, I can talk about this later, we can talk about it later, but a very, very interesting thing is that after this legal guidance, the fiduciaries also feel more comfortable promoting those ESG funds in their investment policy statement. And that could also be another channel that increases the ESG holding. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And then, okay, when we think about the retirement saving behaviors, which is really very sluggish, so it's very interesting to see that there's actually a persistent change of investment behavior in ESG holdings until the end of my sample, until 2019. So it shows that people do have this interest in ESG investment, and when they give them access, and they actually increase their ESG holdings. So does access to ESG increase their retirement contributions? Based on a shorter 2022 US retirement survey, 74% people say that they would participate more in their plans if they're given access to ESG investment. And among the 30% who know that their plans offer ESG, they actually want to put like more than 50% of money to the ESG fund relevant to their total account balance. So here I want to check if the access to ESG increase their retirement contributions or not. So apparently the challenge is that there are very different saving behaviors for the employees located in the liberal versus conservative circuits. To address this issue, I use coordinate exact matching. So in this way, I can compare the firms in the liberal and conservative circuits with exactly the same characteristics. So here you can see that I have a subgroup times year fixed effect, so it's around 1,000 fixed effects. So in this way, I can compare in the same subgroup and year and how their retirement contributions differ from each other. So here, as you can see that the change in total contributions versus plan assets increased 0.9 percentage points each year. And when you compare these two numbers, the increase in total contribution,
Do you match the firms or the employees?
the firms. So all the data I have is at the firm level. Yeah.
And so if there's different savings behaviors in liberal and conservative circuits, you basically compare matching, say, two airline pilots. People from airline with people from airline, but an airline pilot in a liberal circuit can be very different from an airline pilot in a conservative. We're still not attenuating the difference between these two pilots.
So in terms of, so can you be more specific about like what
So
kind
sure,
of
they work in
characteristics?
similar firms, they have
Yeah.
a similar occupation,
Yeah.
but we're still not addressing the challenge that is they have different saving behaviors because they're liberal, because they're conservative.
Right. So that's part I also considered in the matching. So I also consider like their, for example, their political leaning and also their income. And it's a list of characteristics. Yeah, in my paper.
Oh, so you have the firm's
Does that
political
address-
leaning.
So that's measured at the county level by the headquarters of the firm. Yeah.
Okay.
By the political leaning of the headquarter of the firm.
Exactly.
Right, right.
So
in terms
basically-
of voting, she's using voting as the way of measuring that.
Exactly. So let's go back to the, maybe let's go back to the, oh, here. So here, like to measure the local political belief, so the proxy for the local political belief from the employees, I use the vote ratio measured at the county level in the 2016 presidential election. That's also one of the matching variables I look at.
So the only reason someone would locate in Texas is because they're right wing. Is the
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, and then, how much time do we have? I have 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
8 minutes, 8 minutes.
Okay, I see. Okay, so basically this increase in the ESG investment does not crowd out the other existing investment in 401k. I cannot argue that they crowd in new investment, but at least I can argue that they didn't crowd out the existing investment. And this increase in contribution is primarily driven by the increase in employee contribution instead of by the change of matching ratio. Okay, so.
Just a quick question here. Why are you dividing by plan asset instead of number of participants?
Oh, I see. I can check that. Yeah, that could be.
The idea here is that if there's low return, it's going to look like you increase contribution.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I can check that. Yeah, that's.
Just a technical question.
I guess.
If
Okay.
the effect
Give me a
size,
second. Yeah, I guess the reason I do this is because I want to compare these two things. So the ESG holdings is also relevant to like the account balance and then this total contribution versus plan assets, kind of like a ratio.
But this plan asset also includes people who separated and left their assets there, just
Right.
noisier
Kind of
versus
noisy,
if you're
right?
thinking of contribution.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
so my impression
Mhm.
is that in the US, the total allocation to ESG funds
Mhm.
in plans with ESG funds
Mhm.
is only about 2, maybe 3 percentage points of the total balances.
Mhm.
So the effect size here seems oddly large,
Mhm.
because you're saying that the total contributions
Mhm.
normalized by plan assets,
Mhm.
you describe them as 0.9 percentage points each year. Does that mean, oh, that's an annual flow, it's not that it's growing over time?
It's annual flow. It's not growing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So does that square with the total amount of assets in ESG funds?
There's definitely like a large increase in ESG fund in 401k after this shock. But
I'm
if it's
saying,
wired or not,
today, I think it's only about 2 or 3 percentage points of total balances are in
Right.
ESG funds. So
yeah.
I'm just having trouble, just from an accounting basis,
Mhm.
matching that number to the total balances, and that's only in funds that offer ESG. If we include all funds, it's 1/10 of that. So,
let me think.
So they would have to be sort of
yeah.
doubling the returns or something extraordinary.
Return.
And increasing returns is not their primary metric either, of course.
right. And we know they're having returns that are roughly equal to the returns of overall US equities.
Yeah.
So it's not any return effect.
I see what you
So
mean. Maybe
I
we
just
can
think-
try to differentiate the, back to Taha's point, is like differentiate the return part versus the net return part.
Yeah, because the
Does
other
that
thing,
address your question? Yeah.
right, because the other thing is if ESG was generating higher returns,
Yeah.
that would be what the other investment firms would be doing as well. So, you know, in the nature of the beastie, you don't expect that. It's more the, you know. So.
In fact, we know that's not what's happening.
Exactly,
We know the
yeah.
returns
So,
aren't any
but
higher.
Yeah.
So there's something
Yeah, I see
strange
what you
about
mean.
the
Yeah, back-
adding up constraints here.
Yeah. Great. Sounds good. Yeah, I will check that. Awesome. Okay, let's continue. Oh, and go fast. So who is constrained by this legal pressure? So here I want to show you some interesting. The first one is, so the answer is about the household preference heterogeneity and the financial institutions heterogeneity. Because I find that it's actually the green firms located in the conservative circuits increase more in their ESG offering as well as ESG holdings. So here I identify the green firms as the top 30% of ESG score each year in the industry. And as you can see that the firm's greenness actually influence their preference for ESG investment. And the green firms in the conservative circuits actually have preference for ESG investment, but they were constrained from doing so because of the legal pressure. And when the legal discretion removes, they respond more in terms of ESG offering as well also as ESG holdings in conservative circuits compared to the liberal circuits. And another thing I want to show you is about the political leanings at the regional level, the local political leaning at the county level. It's actually the liberal counties within the conservative circuits increase more in their ESG offering and ESG holdings. Okay, so for interest time, I will skip this part. And in terms of the plan performance experience, so the takeaway message is that I don't observe the ESG fund underperform. I don't find they sacrifice financial returns. And however, this kind of funds are expensive, they have more fee, higher expense ratio, especially in the conservative circuits, where the legal scrutiny is especially high of introducing ESG fund in 401k. And then this legal clarification actually caused a 3% reduction in plan excess difference. So let me briefly conclude my talk. So essentially my paper shows that the political environment beyond the investor preference impacts the ESG investment. And the judicial channel explains a significant part of the ESG political gap between liberal and conservative circuits. When we think about politicians who usually represent the majority of their constituents, but there might be a minority of people who have different political leaning, who have different ESG preferences compared to the politicians who represent them. And those households actually are constrained from such investment because of this legal pressure. And when we give them more flexibility, especially in terms of ESG investment, this actually increases their total contributions to their retirement saving. And that is not the end of the story. Right now, 25 conservative state attorneys are lawsuit against the DOL for allowing ESG factor retirement savings. And also, with the recent reverse of the Chevron deference, it's going to be very exciting to see that what's the future of ESG investment in retirement saving. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
I'm really glad to be discussing this paper. I think this is a great program. Once again, I can say that because I was involved in picking papers. And so I'm Fernette Menser from HSC Montreal. And so the paper essentially looks at what is the legal risk of offering ESG funds in the US. So ESG sponsors have that fiduciary responsibility. That means that they have to really prove that the funds that they are offering to their employees have, like, however that is defined, decent risk and return profile. And before 2015, judges had a lot more leeway in determining whether or not an ESG option was prudent to be included on the menu or not. And so after 2015, that judicial discretion was reduced because before it could seem that ESG funds needed a lot of extra justification to be on the menu, and after 2015 that was reduced a little bit. And so this serves this change in the ruling that serves as a natural experiment to say, well, what happened to those conservative circuits, to the firms that were operating there before and after. So the main findings were that when you take away that increased scrutiny of ESG funds, more firms will offer ESG funds, employees will contribute more. Effect size might be debatable, but it seems to be there. So my first comment, because this is a household finance conference, was, well, where is this money coming from? So, and I know that, so this comment is not of a criticism, it's more of maybe an idea for the future research, or maybe also something for you just to discuss. And there is literature from other, well, from the same field, but for things like automatic enrollment. So Anti-ESG has worked on that. Keynote speaker has worked on that, is working on that. And so the question is, when you have this shock, firms are now offering more ESG funds, people are contributing more. Well, my obvious question was, well, where's the money coming from? So what were they doing with that before? Was that money that they were saving elsewhere? Are the plans attracting new investors? So I wasn't sure if you had information on the number of members of the plan, because I didn't see anything on that, and that would have been really, really interesting to for example, document, well, once there is an ESG option, people who have never contributed to 401k, all of a sudden start doing that. And that would be quite different from saying, well, people started to contribute marginally more to a fund that was already worth $100,000, they now start contributing $30. So this is it the extensive or the intensive margin, I think would be really, really interesting. So another comment that I had pertains to the salience. So you have a situation where all of a sudden a lot of plan sponsors who had never offered ESG options were offering an ESG option. And my question was, did they advertise that? So is it that plan participants got an email saying, hey, did you know that now we have that new option on the menu? And that may be something that may incite people to invest more into the plan. But of course, the fact that it was ESG was kind of arbitrary. It possibly could have been something else, saying, hey, did you know that now we offer like, I don't know, either a local fund, an Oregon fund. Did you know that now we offer an oil fund? So was it just the salience of getting that email saying, hey, we have a new option, why don't you come check it out? And I think this is important because that would mean that your current estimate overestimates the effect of simply offering that ESG fund, because it may be mixing salience and the preference for ESG. And so I don't know if it would be possible to have, so first of all, I don't know who would do the advertising. I'm not sure if that would be at the sponsor level or at the provider level. If it's done at the sponsor level, it might be a bit more difficult to get the data. If it's done at the provider level, you might be able to tease out a bit more easily. Well, Vanguard tells me that they did advertise, that other provider tells me they didn't, and then you might be able to do something with that. Measuring firm screenness. So currently, a firm's screenness is measured as benchmarked against their peers, meaning that even a firm that by absolute standards is really brown, maybe it's a smidge greener than its peers, and then is going to be classified as green. And when thinking about how people select into companies and that align with their values, I would argue that most would more look at the absolute greenness rather than the relative greenness. And so, for example, there is that working paper by Baker and co-authors who say that, who would really look at 401k participants and the preference for ESGs, but they look at the industry. So are they working in a polluting industry or not? And I think that at least as maybe a robustness check, it might be interesting to really look at absolute greenness instead of relative greenness, because that, to me, was kind of odd. Regional differences. So regional differences, and this has come up a little bit already during the presentation. When you talk about, for example, the political leaning in a certain county, it's really always at the headquarters of the firm. And that may be a good proxy for some firms, and it could be a terrible proxy for others. So when Google has a huge data center in North Carolina, well, the political leanings between the headquarters and where a lot of the people are actually working might be very, very different. And so I'm not sure if there's any way that you can control, for example, for the concentration of employees who work at the headquarters. That could be one way. You could maybe do a subsample analysis, although it's going to have different problems, where you only look at firms that don't operate branches, or yeah, I don't know. So, or at the very, very least, be maybe a bit more careful with the language, because when you say that that plan participants in, for example, Democrat voting counties, well, we actually don't know. We only know that the firm happens to be headquartered in a county that is a more liberal leaning, but you cannot say that really that the employee is living in that county. One thing about fees. So you find that the fees in conservative circuits for ESG funds are higher. And I was wondering, so you explained that with the increased legal risk. So it's, like there's a higher risk of being scrutinized for offering ESG, and therefore the fees are higher. But that maybe also speaks a bit to the discussion that we had during the presentation about how exactly do we quantify legal risk, or how do we measure, how do we instrument it. I thought that after the 2015 change in the law, or in the fiduciary duty, I thought that the legal risk was pretty much the same across the different circuits. So I thought that everyone now knows the rules. It's there's essentially very, very little leeway now for judges to use their own convictions to rule against ESG. But that means that the fees should not reflect increased legal risk anymore, or there is a problem somewhere else in the identification. Lastly, one point about economic significance. So you say there's an average increase of $340, and if you measure that against the investment that people have in mutual funds within their 401k. But if you measure it actually against the entire plan investments, the economic significance is relatively small. But this brings me back a bit to my first point. I think that this probably masks a lot of heterogeneity. So the change in ESG investment may actually have been very substantial for some households, which from a household finance perspective would be very interesting. Even though on average, maybe this is really peanuts. So honestly, like, what a timely paper to talk about the politics of 401ks. I think this is super interesting as is. I think it's going to be very interesting going forward, as you say. Who knows what's going to happen next, especially now. And so it would be interesting, again, from the household finance perspective. What will this mean for 401k investments? So it's I'm guessing that on average the effect would be small, but maybe for a subgroup of households this is actually going to be a big thing. And so I'm looking forward to the published version of this, and maybe any follow-up studies that you might do for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Franco, for the amazing discussion. It's really helpful. Yeah, so it's very exciting field. It's like, the recent reversal of like Chevron deference. So based on Chevron deference, like the federal judge needs to defer to the legal interpretations from the Department of Labor if the law is unclear. But however, with the recent reverse, so it's kind of interesting to see, if it's going to be a discrepancy, a divergence again across different circuits. Yeah, and then okay, so in terms of the 401k plan, like attract new investors. So yeah, I definitely can track the number of the plan participants. It's like back to Taha's point, plan participants. So I do have the data for that. I can track that. So I guess like the increase in plan participants has two parts. The first one is that the people who work in the firm, who used to work in this firm, and they don't like participate in 401k before, but now they participate. But there's another force which I'm working on now is like in terms of labor market impact. So if like the firms like offer this ESG fund, if they can possibly attract like more talented people because they have this option on the menu. So this could also like influence how many people work for such firms and their the number of plan participants. And in terms of the advertisement, yeah, I like that. So I think that the communication between the employer and also like the financial advisor with their employees is very interesting. It's like how you promote those funds, how do you communicate with them. I have some like anecdotal evidences that like they feel more comfortable promoting those ESG funds because they're less worried about this after legal guidance. But I could check more on that. Yeah, and then. Oh yeah, so in terms of the absolute greenness, so the reason I use the relevant is because I think the employees, most people will choose the industry first and then choose which kind of firms they work within that industry. But I can also check the robust check, like if it changed the result or not. And in terms of the headquarter, so the reason I use the headquarter of the firm is because this kind of raise a lawsuit. Is filed where the investment committee made the wrong decisions, which is usually in the headquarters of the firm, and that's the reason I use the headquarters of the firm to identify. Okay, so in terms of fee, briefly speaking, like the fee is like the two parts. So one part is that the investor preferences matter. So like if the liberal employees, they probably the fiduciary want to charge them higher because they have such preferences. And then the other thing is in terms of like litigation risk. So it kind of like two components play a part here. So the empirical question to see like which part dominates the other or not. Yeah. Yeah, and then in terms of magnitude. So although like it's a small magnitude, but keep in mind that like only like a small percentage. There's still like a lot of plans don't offer ESG at this point. So if we divided the change in magnitude divided by the percentage of plans that actually have the ESG option after the shock, the magnitude is actually getting much larger. Yeah. And then okay, go ahead.
Just a note, your data is 2010 to 2019,
yeah.
But when you read about recent trends, it seems the headlines is ESG past its peak. So
that's definitely right, yeah.
The US ESG market has fund outflow last year, this year,
yeah.
At the pension conference in Europe in mid-year. NENSPA, people discussed about Europeans having less ESG preferences in the current high cost of living environment. You have to be rich to afford ESG preferences. So I wonder whether your optimistic story is due to a certain window, and if you will extend it. Individuals care more about returns and just being able to fund their retirement, and there seem to be fewer ESG funds launched, and so I'm not sure that this trend that you're finding is continuing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I can check the more recent data after 2019, 2020, and then to see what's going on.
But then you got a problem there, and this is sort of discussant raises, and I want to go back to the legal issues, because it was October 2020 when Trump had the Department of Labor bring their ruling down that said that they may only consider pecuniary factors, and that was the thing. And then Biden's first veto actually in 2023 was to get rid of it. So January 7th, we expect what's going to happen. Having said that, the argument of the defense is you can justify ESG on the grounds of pecuniary. I agree that Chevron, which is a nice irony, should get rid of that discussion, but let's put that aside for a separate debate. The defense argument is that considering ESG in terms of sustainability, it's just taking a longer horizon on the pecuniary factors, and that we're thinking of pecuniary factors, so get out of our business.
Yep.
The problem that we have, though, is whether, in fact, these are what has actually been done in these ESG funds in terms of pecuniary returns, the shape of them over time. And we just don't have the data there. So I think the problem with going after 2019, even though more data are better, is that you've got this huge series of confounds that's put a chill on things and provided some nominal basis for it. And the problem was if they just changed the abstract to say, we are looking at pecuniary factors over the long term when there are existential risks due to sustainability, then if it's only the abstracts that they're bringing the litigation on pursuant to the Department of Labor regulation, they're fine. So I think there's so many sort of artificial factors, if I can call it here, at work. It's very hard to tease out pure effects. That's
exactly.
the concern.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. And also, like, if you check my paper, I show that actually the ESG offering has a little bit going down a little bit in terms of difference between the work reserve circuits, and that's exactly because, like, in 2019, like Trump tried to, just does not allow this ESG factor in 401k, and it's vetoed by Biden, in 2020. So there's some like turbulence at the end.
And also you have many companies that are pretending to do sort of green accounts. So they're doing that themselves directly. Yep. And that's a massively mitigating factor. Over here.
So another aspect of the litigation risk is not just the consideration of whether in principle the ESG fund has preferable pecuniary risk return factors, but also documentation of the investment committee's decision to adopt the ESG fund. Right. And so if an investment committee sits around and says, hey, we're motivated by activism, then and that is what is written in their minutes, then subsequently they are liable, even if they can come up with some after the fact risk and return story. Yeah. And so,
unless the activism was, I want you to worry about my long-term pecuniary return.
Exactly.
That's the key.
But the key thing is, when the investment committee undertakes the conversation and adopts ESG, they need to put into their minutes clearly what their motivation was. Exactly. And I do think that there is a lot of litigation risk because a lot of investment committees are very bad at creating that documentation. And then what happens is the HR group propagates the availability of the fund and starts talking about these activism issues instead of focusing on the risk and return characteristics, and then the firm is at risk of litigation. So unfortunately, I do think despite the clarity about pecuniary factors only, there will be firms that are going to find themselves in court, like American Airlines.
But surely, pursuant after October 2020, the lawyers in the firm would just say, just add the P word. I mean, I agree with you that that's actually probably what happens, and I agree. And if they write those minutes down and don't shred them, which they can't, they're in trouble. But surely the investment committees know the pecuniary.
So I sit on 2 investment committees.
And you add the P word.
I make a point of making sure that we're very disciplined on my investment committees at Harvard and at a charitable foundation. But I know that a lot of participants in this ecosystem are thinking very much about how much they care about the environment and thinking less about DOL guidance.
Absolutely.
And so we end up with this litigation risks, which makes your paper relevant.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, thank you.
The one thing that the discussant brought up that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is this extensive versus intensive margin thing. I think you talked about it a little bit, but I think that is actually really crucial to the mechanism, because the thing that I think of the most in terms of the effects of ESG options on investing is there was this great anecdote from Laura Stark's AFA address a couple years ago where she basically made this. Yeah, she talked about this colleague who I think the colleague's mom never invested in the stock market until there were ESG options. So to me, that is like the most clear mechanism where there's people who think investing is unethical unless there's an ESG option. And if it's on the intensive margin, I think the mechanism is very different. And also, I think if it's the extensive margin, I think that's actually a much bigger problem. There's people who are just not getting wouldn't be getting any retirement savings at all. So I just encourage you to do everything you can to teach those two things out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the findings I show here is driven by the both extensive and intensive. So in terms of like the extensive, more firms start to offer those ESG funds. Like in the intensive margin, like they also feel more comfortable like promoting those funds and advertise those funds, and the more people like start to participate. And then, that part I have to double check the number of plan participants. But yeah, so it's kind of like the driving forces of these two things come up together. And in terms of this example, like she only wants to do some retirement saving if there's an ESG option. So that's actually something I want to talk about, talk about this with you is like, should we consider this ESG as something like luxury, or should we take this as like a more accessible option and to make everybody has the chance to invest in it? And then so that also like this is kind of like relevant to like the paternalism, like how paternalistic the fiduciary should be. Like, should we just give the people, the employees have like a freedom of choices, that we give them the choices and then they can make decisions if they want to do it or not, or we should just like have more like protection for those people, like for those unsophisticated investors, like probably are more vulnerable, they don't know how to identify if this is a good ESG fund or not. Then so I think it's kind of like it's an interesting question to think about.
Any more questions? Good. Awesome. Thank you.
So much.